new book titled A Journey in Service. We'll be looking at what we can find in the rest of the chapters. You will recall that when we started, we've read chapter 1 and 2, and we are currently in chapter 3 and 4. So we'll be looking at the content of these chapters on this day that the Lord has made. So we'll be politicking and be glad in it. There have been so much reaction as regards the book in the media. Different people have been, submitting their comments about it. Some have even been asking for the prosecution of Ibrahim Babangida, the former military head of state. So we started yesterday. If you missed it, do well to watch it, the chapter 1 and 2. So today we will be diving into the chapter 3 and 4. And it's quite a bit of long read because we stopped at page 27 yesterday. And today we'll be going all the way to page 81. That covers the chapter 3 and 4. The chapter 3 is about a young officer and a gentleman. Chapter 4, the Nigerian Civil War and its NDA teaching years. The book is in 5 parts, as I disclosed to you, and the 5 parts is in different chapters. So we covered part 1, which comprises of 2 chapters yesterday. So today we'll be covering part 2, which comprises of 2 chapters as well. So let me try and locate the chapter, then we start immediately, because we have quite a long interesting read to catch up with. As I said, I won't analyze, I will just read it out for you. And those of you that joined me yesterday, you will recall that there were a lot of revelations, so many revelations in that particular book. It's a book that I would personally recommend for anybody that cares about the history of Nigeria. So when you are informed about what is in the book, when another person writes another memo for or against the submission of Ibrahim Babangida, then we can begin to do what we call a comparative analysis of Ibrahim's submission, or we triangulate the facts submitted by Ibrahim Babangida to that of the other person that is writing his or her own memo. So we'll be reading it. I think it's safe for me to start, but before I start, can I do some sound check? Ayomikpo Fasoroti, great to have you. I can see you in my comment section. Can you please confirm how audible my voice is? Sound check before I start, because I want to start in earnest. So can somebody watching me please confirm the sound of my voice, how audible it is at your end? While I wait for that, the chapter 3, I want to start, but I need somebody to confirm the sound for me at his or her end. Can somebody watching me right now please confirm the sound for me at your end, so that we know we're on the same page? Okay, sound good. Thank you, Negro. I see your comment. Okay, let's start the reading. Babangida's book, chapter 3. I started my military career at the Nigerian Military Training College, NMTC, on Monday. Yesterday, when we read the book, Babangida talked about his background. He mentioned Wushishi, he mentioned Bida in Mina, he mentioned how one of his teacher, Mr. Is it Okwemi Posi, something like that, how he got into the military, how Captain Yakubu Gowon, the Gowon now that is a retired general, came to address them. It's quite a lot. So if you missed any part of it, just catch up with it in my video catalog. So let's start this now, chapter 3, titled A Young Officer and a Gentleman. I started my military career at the Nigerian Military Training College, NMTC, on Monday, December 10, 1962. I arrived the day before to join other classmates from Bida Provincial Secondary School, Gaba, Duba, sorry, I need to take that. I arrived the day before to join other classmates from Bida Provincial Secondary School, including Gaba Duba, Sani Sami, Sani Bello, Muhammad Magoro, Gado Nasco, and Maman Vatsa. You remember I told you that Maman Vasta yesterday was, he joined the military as well, and he was IBB's friend, but it was IBB that eventually, so you can read about the story. If you Google it, Maman Vasta, you will read more about him and what led to IBB, his bosom friend. In all, 60 of us, drawn from different parts of the country, had reported to the commandant at the NMTC in Kaduna to commence our basic military training as members of Course 6. Founded in April 1960 by Prime Minister Alhaji Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, the Nigerian Military Training College (NMTC) was a transformation of the earlier British-run Royal Military Forces Training College (RMFTC), designed to train on home soil Nigerians that would eventually command and manage a future Nigerian army after independence. The idea at inception was to provide basic military training for infantry officers who would subsequently go abroad for more formal training. That means that when IBB joined army, they used to send military guys abroad for more formal training. That was pre-independence. Let's continue the reading. NMTC's first cadets entered the college in March 1960. A roll call of that first set of cadets, including names of women who would not only feature prominently in the growth of the Nigerian army, but also in the country's development. That list included names like Theophilus Yakubu Danjuma, Samuel Ogbemudia, Julius Alani Akinriade, Alabi Isama, Emmanuel Abisoye, David Banboye, Ben Bulie, Ayo Ariyo, Ignatius Obeya, Martin Adamu, and Sule Apollo. NMTC became the Nigerian Defense Academy 4 years later. Again at inception, NMTC and subsequently NDA was patterned after the Joint Defense Service Training Institute of the Indian Armed Forces in Kadakwasla, Pune, India, where cadets of 3 services, Army, Navy, and Air Force, trained together before they went on to their respective service academies for further pre-commission training. Not surprisingly, many of the earlier trainers at the NDA and its precursor, NMTC, were Indian Army officers. The first commandant of the NDA was an Indian Army Brigadier General M.R. Verma. Today, the NDA has become a much bigger outfit. From its modest beginnings in 1960, when we were there in 1962 as training cadets, to a full-blown degree and postgraduate degree awarding academy with an entirely Nigerian training staff, the NDA has remained dedicated to the original idea of training young cadets and instilling discipline and leadership skills in them, albeit in an academic setting. It is also instructive that since 1981, the NDA had begun training foreign militaries. Now, I pause there. That means that even the NDA, our Nigerian Defense Academy, that is struggling to fight Boko Haram, struggling to conquer bandits now, was even training foreign militaries as at 1981. This Nigerian NDA something was training foreign militaries, but the same NDA now to fight Boko Haram and bandits is a problem. Let's continue the reading. To put things in greater perspective, it might be pertinent at this stage to delve briefly into the history of the Nigerian Army. The Nigerian Army, which prides itself as perhaps the 3rd largest in Africa after the South Africa and the Egyptian armies, was a product of circumstance. It arose out of the need for the constabulary forces required to instill and enforce order in the growing British colony. After the fall of Lagos to the British on August 6, 1861, under the bogus Treaty of Cession, the British administrator of Lagos, Captain J. Glover, raised 100 men known as the Lagos Constabulary. Almost simultaneously, Frederick Lugard, after earning a so-called royal charter for the Royal Niger Company to establish a government over the Niger and Benue valleys, raised 2 other forces, the Royal Niger Constabulary Force based in northern Nigeria and the Oil Niger Irregulars. Over time, these 3 forces would be merged into a single West African Frontier Force, WAFF. Later, the Constabulary Force, based in northern Nigeria, led to the creation of a northern Nigeria regiment under Frederick Lugard's command. In contrast, the merger of the Oil Niger Irregulars and the Lagos Constabulary led to the forming of a Southern Nigeria regiment under the command at different times of Lieutenant Colonel C. Carter 1894 to 1901 and Colonel J. Wilcox 1901 to 1909. These two regiments, sorry, my hand has dabaru the page. Just a moment while I try to figure it out. Apologies, please. Just a moment. Apologies, my people. My hand just dabaru the page. Sorry. Apologies, my people. Today the NDS. Okay, I think I got it. Today the NDS to come larger outfit and to put things together. Okay. Yeah, I'm there now. Okay. Later, the constabulary force based in northern Nigeria led to the creation of a northern Nigeria regiment under. Okay, I think I've read that place. These two regiments were now used not only for quelling insurrections and maintaining order, but also for punitive expeditions during the annexation of Nigeria by Frederick Lugard. The amalgamation of Nigeria in 1914 led to the unification of the Southern and Northern regiments. The Northern Nigeria regiment became the 1st and 2nd battalions of the new Nigerian regiment, while the Southern Nigerian regiment became the 3rd and 4th battalions of the Nigerian regiment. By 1930, the Nigerian regiment was 3,500 men strong as part of what came to be known as the Royal West African Frontier Force. Its 4 battalions were reorganized into 6, and the colony was divided into northern and southern commands. During the formation of the Nigerian regiment, no Nigerian was commissioned as an officer of the regiment until the late 1940s. By then, of course, World War II had ended. Since the agitation for independence had begun, the British knew that the eventual formation of a proper Nigerian army was only a matter of time, and that it will happen, and that it will be prudent to prepare the army for the eventual takeover of its command and leadership by the Nigerian Officer Corps. Meanwhile, some Nigerian non-commissioned officers serving in the Nigerian Regiment's technical department as ordnance engineers and signal officers were sent to the Eton All Officer Cadet School in the United Kingdom for training. When they completed their courses, they were granted short service commissions. Some historians of Nigeria's military history claim that the first Nigerian to be granted a short commission was Lieutenant Louis Victor Ugboma in 1948. But somehow, Ugboma disengaged from the regiment because of his nationalist passions. This development may explain why the honor of the first Nigerian to be commissioned with tag N/1 goes to Lieutenant Wellington Duke Bassey, who was commissioned on April 30, 1949. It was followed quickly by Lieutenant Johnson Thomas Aguyi Erosin as N/2 on June 12, 1949, and Lieutenant Samuel Adesujo Ademulegun N/3 on June 12, 1949. In 1950, Lieutenant Ralph Adetunji Sodende was commissioned. Zachariah Maimalari was commissioned as a second lieutenant in 1953. When Queen Elizabeth visited Nigeria between January 25 and February 15, 1956, the Nigerian regiment was renamed the Queen's Own Nigerian Regiment. Later that year, the Queen's Own Nigerian Regiment became the Nigerian Military Force. Are you following the history of how the Nigerian army was formed? So before, this Nigerian army was called the Queen's Own Nigerian Regiment. But wait, just a moment. Queen Elizabeth, you came from your father's land in the UK and come and rename the army formed in another man's territory Queen's Own. These UK people. Okay, let's continue. Later that year, the Queen ONR, that is Queen's Own Nigerian Regiment, became the Nigerian Military Force, even though it remained under the control of the British Army Council. On June 8, 1958, the British Army Council relinquished control of the NMF to the self-governing Nigerian government. Then, at independence in 1960, the Nigerian military force became the Royal Nigerian Army, RNA. And when we became a republic in 1963, the RNA became the Nigerian Army. Do you follow the history? Okay, that change to a republic coincided with the difference in the rank structure and instrument of office peculiar to the British military. It also witnessed the introduction of the green khaki uniform of the Nigerian army. Now, Babangida placed an emphasis here. Ibrahim Babangida, from this paragraph, he placed some emphasis. He said, from our first day, NMTC was a challenging experience that none of us prepared for. As part of the tradition of psychological breaking us in, on our first day, sergeant majors shouted at us, called us names, kicked us, and humiliated us. I need to take a pause there, my people. You see, those military training that you usually see, the way they shout on those people, the way they kick them, the way they treat them as if they are just, one good for nothing people. So it has been happening even as at when IBB, Ibrahim Babangida, joined the military. You see, he said, as part of the tradition of psychologically breaking us in, that means that it's part of, I think, the military something, they call it breaking people in. So he said, on our first day, sergeant majors shouted at us. We usually see that on the video on social media. So I think IBB is right in this regard, where they shout at military trainees anyhow. He said, called us names. Of course, even some of you that did NYSC, they usually call, ordinary cover, they call them Otondo Mumu. So he said, well, during their own military training, they called them names, which we usually see, kicked us. That one, even recently, a video was on social media when I think a soldier came to the barrack late, and one of his boss, I think, I saw the video then. If I don't have it on my phone, I even want to make an analysis about it, was beating that particular soldier till that one suffered a leg injury. So that means it has been the military tradition since the days of IBB, Babangida. So that means that no hope in terms of military training. Military training cannot be decent. They must shout at you, they must call you names, they must kick you, they must humiliate you. Because according to Babangida in his book, he said, as part of the tradition of psychologically breaking us in, on our first day, sergeant majors shouted at us, called us names, kicked us, and humiliated us. It was hell. This is according to Ibrahim Babangida. I'm reading his book out to you. He said it was hell. So that means that military training has always been hell since since Babangida joined the military. Let's continue. It's getting very interesting on a Sunday like this. We couldn't walk from one point to another. We had to be doubled, taking double steps in our walk as if race walking. We were all convinced that the push-ups and pull-ups would we were all convinced that the push-ups and pull-ups would kill us. Between these physical and endurance tests, which went on for months, and bouts of academic work, we engaged in obstacle races and military training. The exercises included general military skills, individual preparedness training, preparedness for extended field operations, conducting small unit tactical operations, and small-scale weapons training. If you are watching this video, please do well to like this video so that other people can get to see it. That's very important. Please do well to like this video so that other people can get to see it as well. So those early days were so demanding that some of us decided to run away. So one day, I persuaded Gaba Duba that we should go into town to see his father, a political figure, and tell him we wanted to abandon the cause. The older Duba didn't waste time with his reply. In response that I have never forgotten, half pep talk and half threat, he calmly advised us to go back to school, failing which he would ensure that none of us ever got employment anywhere if we dared to abscond from the program. I need to take a pause. It means say Babangida self, that was forming, threat all over the place. Babangida himself was as soft as pap before that he want to even leave the military training. He want to jack padano from the military training. Now, that did the trick. We settled down to work on our return to school and were amazed that the 5-month course went by so quickly. Yet, short as it seemed, I have vivid memories of my 5 months at the college for many reasons. Apart from an opportunity to consolidate my relationship with my classmates from Bida, I made new friends. I met, for instance, a pleasant young man, Paul Taffa, who had remained a close friend and associate ever since. I also met another young man from Kano, Sonny Abacha. You know, I told you yesterday that as I'm reading to you, anytime I make gang or what's that movie sound? Gang, that means that's the place that is getting interesting. You know, when you are watching movie, you just say gang. You know those movie sound. Now he said, I take that again. I also met another young man from Kano, Sonny Abacha. By the grace of God, God willing, we will read this book to the end. Not today, we'll be reading it gradually because I find this book so very interesting. Now, our path would repeatedly cross until he died in 1998. That is Sonny Abacha. 2 of my instructors at NMTC, Captain Christian C. Ude, and our company commander, Captain Martin Cookshine, made a tremendous impact on me and my fledgling military career. As platoon commander, Captain Ude took a particular interest in me and made sure he kept in touch with me when I proceeded to India for the second half of my training. I have always remembered both of them. On April 20th, 1963, we passed out of the NMTC, and barely days after, I and some classmates were on our way to India for the second half of our training. Let me take a pause there. So when you passed out for military training in 1963, IBB and his classmates, all these Abdul Salami and all of them, were sent to India. So is it not shameful that by the time that he was leaving the military, Nigerians that are joining the military and Nigerians that are joining the military now do not have such opportunity because they send them to India for training? That means they were trained abroad. They have the best of training. Let's continue the reading. It's getting interesting. We headed for one of India's oldest military academies, the Indian Military Academy, Dehradun. I hope I get that pronunciation correctly. Dehradun. Now in Uttarakhand. Founded in 1932, the pride of the Indian military has, since its inception, been the officer training academy for the Indian Army. As I stated earlier, during our independence in 1960, the Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa government decided that it would be more prudent to have the government of India assist Nigeria in army training. That explains in part why many of Nigeria's army officers were trained in India. When we arrived at the end of April 1963, the Sino-Indian War of 1962 between India and China over the sovereignty of a widely separated landmass along the Himalayan foothills had just ended. There had been many border skirmishes between India and China after the 1959 Tibetan uprising, when India granted asylum to the Dalai Lama. The impact of the 1962 war left its mark on the academy, judging by the nature of the training we received. From 1963 to 1964, the academy's initial 1.5-year regular courses were truncated, and a new emergency courses were introduced. And since we had an earlier training period at the NMTC, this arrangement suited our plans. The schedule at the Indian Academy was so hectic and intense, but at least we were now in our family. We were now in more familiar territory. For example, at NMTC, our regular day started before daybreak, followed by 1 hour of drills and physical exercises. Then, after a heavy breakfast, we broke into outdoor and indoor activities depending on the choice and nature of the program. These indoor and outdoor activities will be followed by a compulsory regime of extracurricular activities, hobby classes, and indoor activities before we finally collapsed into our beds at about 10 p.m. Our routines were sometimes complex and challenging, at other times monotonous, but always adventurous and full of challenges. The Indian Academy's training program included a practical attachment to a regiment of the Indian Army at the end of the course. However, the formal commissioning of the new officers preceded such attachment. Accordingly, one of the formal training ended in September, and I, that's Ibrahim Babangida, was commissioned as a regular commandant officer of the Royal Nigerian Army. I opted to be attached to the Indian Armored Regiment known as the 17 Horse Pune Regiment. My choice of the Armored Regiment over others was not accidental. Even though I knew then that the Royal Nigerian Army didn't have an armored corps, even though I knew the then Royal Nigerian Army didn't have an armored corps, still fixated on being an engineer, it seemed logical to be part of the operating and maintaining armored to be part of operating and maintaining armored fighting vehicles, weapons system, and communications equipment. At the time, there was an additional sentimental reason for opting for the armored corps. I fell in love with the uniquely bright French grey and maroon colors of the Indian Armored Regiment, particularly its distinctive black beret, as opposed to the rifle green and blue colored beret worn by the regiments of the other arms and services respectively. Now, Babangida now wants to tell us about his return to Nigeria. He said, I returned to Nigeria from India in January 1964 as Second Lieutenant Ibrahim Badamasi with personnel army number N/438. I was promptly deployed to the Reconnaissance Squadron, the Turaki Squadron, 1st Brigade, Kaduna. Although the overall commander of the 1st Brigade was Brigadier Samuel Adesujo Ademulegun, young officers hardly had contact with him. I had Major Chris Anufuro, Major Hassan Castina, and Major Okpo Isong as my immediate commanders. These officers were very kind to me in their different ways. However, before I settled down to work at the 1st Brigade, a particular incident led me to add Babangida to my name. Getting interesting. During official engagements that led to my deployment to Kaduna, officers who confused the Yoruba name Gbadamosi with my last name Badamasi repeatedly asked me whether I was Yoruba. That question had also come up a few years before during my enlisting interview for the military. Since that question persisted, and since I knew I wasn't Yoruba, I decided to take on my father's other name as my last name. And I remember joking about it then and saying, regardless of the name change, I am still my father's son. As happens with new and young entrants into the profession, especially those on overseas courses, I was put on probation for months after returning from India. Somewhere along the line, a final report arrived saying that I was okay and ready for work. During those years, I came under the considerable influence of some officers, including Major John Obienu, a bright, handsome, articulate, Sandhurst-trained officer. Major Obienu inspired us and instilled so much pride in us in the Armored Corps. We all admired him and wanted to be like him. We even tried to dress like him. I spent 2 memorable years in Kaduna after India. It was also a period I could never forget, with friends like Lieutenant Duba, Lieutenant Chris Ugokwe, Lieutenant Ronald Ogbona, Lieutenant Alassan Yakubu, Lieutenant J.C. Ojuku, and Lieutenant Yakubu Anifowoshe. Together we worked hard, but we also partied a lot. 10 long nights out were consumed by human self-indulgence and did what every young man did. It was great fun. Did what every young man did. Your guess is as good as mine that IBB is a game master. That did what every young man did. That means IBB was a game master. Okay, let's continue the reading. There are so many stories to tell about those years. I shall confine myself to just one. One day, IBB is telling us the story now. One day, I brought a. You see, I haven't read this part that I said. That means that IBB was a game master. Now he's about to make a confession. This same Ibrahim Babangida, he said, one day I brought a group of female friends to the apartment Gaba Duba, and I shared in the barracks, unmarried housing section, violating the rules. Just as I stepped out to purchase drinks for my guests, the sound from my loud gramophone record player must have filtered out, causing our commander at the time, Major Ato Unegbe, to inquire from my friend Lieutenant Ronald Ogbona where the female giggles and the noise were coming from. Roland, who knew the culprit was me, lied to the commander but assured him that the culprit would be fished out. You see that Babangida is, Naiwele. Okay, let's continue. Meanwhile, the commander ordered that the culprit be put under house arrest whenever he was identified. In the interim, Roland, pretending to be looking for the culprit, asked in his broken Hausa, Kai Neko, are you the one? That Kai Neko means, are you the one? That is, are you the one guilty of illicitly entertaining female guests and playing loud music? Until we parted ways many years later, those words, Kainekwo, became my pet name for Roland. Fast forward to December 2022, when Roland visited me in Mina after many years of being out of touch. He had come when I was receiving a large delegation from outside the state. Confronted by a sea of faces as he entered the large sitting room, he could not locate me. So I made it easy for him. I yelled from where I sat, Kainekwo. First he froze in an impromptu salute before erupting in prolonged laughter and enveloping me in a warm embrace. Then he retorted, Abba Oga, don't you ever forget things? It is essential to add that my 2 years in Kaduna between 1964 and early 1966 were interspersed with military duties in quelling both the Tiv riots in 1965 and the disturbances that arose from the failed Western Nigeria regional elections of the late 1965. In both cases, my job was to help quell the disturbances in surveillance. And although those interludes were not full-blown warfare situations, they brought me close to the brutal and futile realities of violence and war skirmishes on a reasonably large scale. During one of those moments, I had the rare privilege of meeting Brigadier Zachariah Maimalari for the first time. For those young officers, mainly from northern Nigeria, Brigadier Maimalari was a legendary figure. Sometime during the Tiv riots, Maimalari had stopped by to see Major Azan Castina, who had just taken over from Lieutenant Colonel James Yakubu Pan as the commander of the Reconnaissance Regiment in Makurdi. To be the one to wait on Maimalari during that visit was something I never forgot. Considered the first regular combatant Nigeria in the officer corps of the Nigerian Army, in contrast to 28 other officers of his time who rose and were commissioned from the ranks, Maimalari who was born in today's Yobe State, was one of the earliest Nigerian officers to command the officer cadet training wing of what used to be known as the Boys Company in Zaria. From that position, he inspired and motivated a generation of officers who rose to become very senior officers of the Nigerian Army. Who rose to become very senior officer. Reputed for being a strict and highly disciplined military officer, Maimalari rose as a brigadier to command the 2nd Brigade of the Nigerian Army between 1963 and 1966. He was gruesomely killed during the abortive military coup d'etat of 1966. Talking of the military coup d'etat of 1966, Talking of the military coup d'etat of 1966 brings me to one of the darkest moments in our national history. Don't miss this part. It's a very interesting part. Now, it's trying to tell us Babangida Ibrahim, or who some of you know as IBB, is trying to tell us about the coup of 1966. In the early hours of January 5, 1966, I was waking up from my sleep at about 5 a.m. with loud continuous bangs on my door by my good friend Lieutenant Christopher Ugokwe. I had just gotten some hours. I had gotten home. I had just gotten home hours before from a late night party and didn't want to be disturbed. But when the banging persisted, I grudgingly got out to confront a bewildered Christopher, all dressed up in field uniform, screaming at me, "Ibrahim, get up! We have to go." "Go where at this time?" I queried in reply. Still breathless, Chris continued almost incoherently, "Didn't you hear that there has been a coup and we have been told to report to the squadron to see our boss?" Our boss was, of course, Major Hassan Usman Castina. I quickly changed into my uniform as we headed out to the squadron. As we drove past Nasarawa, which housed the minister's quarters and the official residence of the Sultana of Sokoto and Premier of Northern Nigeria, Sir Ahmadu Bello, we noticed that the Sultana's home was on fire. Chris said he was sure the troops had bombed it. We soon arrived at the squadron headquarters where Major Hassan Castina was waiting to address us. If you are yet to like this video and you are watching me, please give us the like button so that other people can get to see it. Now back to the reading. Very soberly, Major Hassan addressed us in his office and told us what he knew then. He told us that his friend and classmate at Sandhurst, Major Chukuma Kaduna Nzeogu. This is where it gets interesting. Some of you that know about that 1966 coup would have been hearing the Nzeogu coup. This is the person that Ibrahim Babangida is referring to in his book. So now let's get into the details. He said he told us that his friend and classmate at Sandhurst, Major Chukuma Kaduna Nzeogu, had led a coup d'etat and that Nzeogu had confronted him earlier in the day to make up his mind to join the coup or face the consequences of not doing so. Hassan said his agreement to play along with Nzeogu saved his life. Major Hassan then instructed us to ensure everybody in the squadron stayed inside. As a young second lieutenant, I, Ibrahim Babangida, was lost for words. I was only 24-year-old and had never known the type of military intervention we were experiencing. So that means that was the first coup experience of Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. Please do well to like this video and please share so that others can get to watch it. And he said that was the first military intervention we were experiencing. I was only vaguely familiar with Gamal Abdel Nasser and his free officers movement hosting King Farouk of Egypt in 1952. But that was textbook stuff. To have experienced it firsthand was different. Later that morning, acting presumably as the leader of the Supreme Council of the Revolution of the Nigerian Armed Forces, Major Nzeogu addressed all officers in Kaduna at the brigade headquarters, looking quite ruffled in his bandaged neck and left arm. Nzeogu, in a speech in which he referred to us as comrades, informing us that the military had taken over the government of Nigeria and that he had secured northern Nigeria in the name of the Supreme Council of the Revolution. He then appealed for cooperation and understanding from all the officers present. At a subsequent press conference, Nzeogu elaborated on what he described as Operation Damisa. Damisa being the Hausa word for the leopard, which never changes its spot, describing the operation as a necessary service to our country. The normal coup orientation, when they carry out coup, they will say, oh, it is for the interest of the country, it is a service to the country. That's the orientation they used when Babangida witnessed his first coup, the Nzeogu coup in 1966. Now, he said, describing the operation as a necessary service to our country to get it of all its filth and corruption. The normal lyrics we used to hear to get rid of filth and corruption, filth and corruption. Okay, let's continue. Later in the day, the gory details of what happened, not just in Kaduna, but other parts of the country, started to emerge. In Kaduna, the premier, Sir Ahmadu Bello, his senior wife, please, if you are watching me, try and press the love button. Try and like this video if you are yet to like it, so that other people can at least get to see it and also enjoy the reading as well. I'm here doing the stress to read. It doesn't cost you anything. It's free to like. Maybe some of you think if you like, they will charge you money. No, it's free. To press the like button, they are not charging you any money. Just try and like the video so that others can get to see it. So later in the day, the gory details of what had happened, not just in Kaduna, but other parts of the country, started to emerge. In Kaduna, the premier, Sir Ahmadu Bello, his senior wife, Afsatu, his senior assistant security secretary, Malam Ahmed Ben Musa Ahmed Pategi, a government driver, and the head of his bodyguards, Zarumi, had all been killed before the break of dawn. There were other killings in Kaduna. The commander of the 1st Brigade of the Nigerian Army, Brigadier Samuel Ademulegun, and his pregnant wife, Latifa, whom every senior officers jocularly referred to as Sisi Nurse, was gunned down in their bedroom. Not far away from their residence, the deputy commandant of the Nigerian Defense Academy, Colonel Raphael Sodeinde, was also murdered. Outside Kaduna, the story was duplicated in Ibadan and Lagos. In Ibadan, the deputy premier, Chief Remi Fani Kayode, I think maybe that's the father of FFK, Femi Fani Kayode. The deputy premier, Chief Remi Fani Kayode, was arrested and detained. The premier, Chief Samuel Ladoke Akitola, was not so lucky. The coup plotters killed him after he tried to put up a fight. The Lagos scene was just as horrific. Apart from Prime Minister Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa and Finance Minister Chief Festus Okotie-Eboh, some of you will be familiar with all these names if you are conversant with politics and Nigeria's history. Chief Finance Minister Chief Festus Okotie-Eboh, who were kidnapped from their residences and later murdered. Much of the leadership of the Nigerian army was wiped out by the plotters. The Adjutant General of the Army, Lieutenant Colonel James Yakubu Pan, was the first to be picked up in the presence of his wife, Elizabeth. He never came back alive. Then came the turn of the Acting Chief of Staff at Army Headquarters, Colonel Kor Mohammed, who was also assassinated, Lieutenant Colonel Abogo Lagema, then the commander of the 4th Battalion at Ibadan, was not spared either. He was gunned down at his Federal Palace hotel room in Lagos. But one of the most painful was the killing of Brigadier Zakaria Maimalari. That's his friend, right? Having only just remarried a month before the January coup, following the tragic death of his wife, Mariamu, Maimalari was at 36 considered one of the finest officers of the Nigerian army. As I stated earlier, he embodied the best of the military: discipline, courage, service, respect, integrity, and enduring leadership skills. As the commander of the Southern Brigade, he had all the fighting forces of the battalions under him: the Field Artillery Corps, the armored and mechanized squads. It was said then that Maimalari could mobilize the entire brigade to fight back in the event of a foreign attack. That was how important his position was at the time. The coup plotters knew that it needed to be eliminated for them to succeed. He initially escaped the mutineers when they struck at his 11 Thompson Avenue residence at Ikoyi, Lagos. But when from his hiding place in the scrubs around his home, he spotted his chief of staff and brigade major, Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna, driving past. He came out of hiding believing he was safe. Unknown to him, Major Ifeajuna was one of the plotters. Almost instantly, Maimalari was gunned down by his chief of staff. Let me read that paragraph again, because there are some life lessons here that in the process of war, don't trust anybody. So let me read that paragraph again. He said, let me reverse back a bit, because there are some great life lessons there. He was speaking about how my Malari was killed during the coup. He said he initially escaped the mutineers, that's the coup plotters, when they struck at his 11 Thompson Avenue residence at Ikoyi, Lagos. But when from his hiding place in the scrubs around his home, he spotted his chief of staff and brigade Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna driving past. He came out of hiding, believing he was safe. Unknown to him, Major Ifeajuna was one of the plotters. Almost instantly, my Malari was gunned down by his chief of staff. I hope you have picked the life lessons there. Now let's continue. By Monday, January 17th, the situation had stabilized somewhat following the arrest and detention of Major Nzeogu and some of the other coup plotters. And it also became clear that Brigadier General Thomas Umunakwe Aguyi Ironsin had assumed power as head of the federal military government and supreme commander of the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. It was a terrible time for the Nigerian military. As I have said elsewhere, as a young officer who saw all of this from a distance, probably ethnic sentiment did not drive the original objective of the coup plotters. For instance, the head of the plotters, Major Kaduna Nzeogu, was only Igbo in name. Born and raised in Kaduna, his immigrant parents were from Okpanam in today's Delta State, which in 1966 was in the old Midwestern region. Nzeogu spoke fluent Hausa and was as Hausa as anybody. He and his original team probably thought, even if naively, that they could turn things around for the better in the country. That said, it was innocuously callous for Nzeogu to have murdered Sir Amadu Bello and his wife Afsatu, because not only were they eminently adored by many, but also because they were said not to have put up a fight. From that moment, the putsch that infuriated the outsiders to its supposed original intention, and it took on an unmistakably ethnic coloration, compounded by the fact that there were no related coup activities in the eastern region. This is where the problem between the Igbos and the Hausa Fulanis started from, the Nzeigo coup, because they said that they were angry. That means the Hausa Fulanis were angry that the Nzeigo murdered Amadu Bello and his wife Afsatu. So the coup now took an ethnic dimension, and the Hausa Fulani stock in the army were now against those from the eastern region. Now let's continue this reading of the revelation by Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, former head of state of Nigeria. He said it should, however, be borne in mind that some senior officers of Igbo extraction were also victims of the January coup. For instance, my erstwhile commander at the reconnaissance squadron in Kaduna, Lieutenant Colonel Ato Chinyelu Unegbe, was brutally gunned down by his own brother, in quotes, Major Chris Anufuro, in the presence of his pregnant wife at his 7 Point Road residence in Apapa for merely being a threat to the revolution. As a disciplined and strict officer who, as the quartermaster general of the army, was also in charge of ammunition, weapons, equipment, vehicles, and other vital items for the army, the coup plotters feared that he might not cooperate with them. It should be remembered that some non-Igbo officers like Major Adewale Ademoyega, Captain Ganiu Adeleke, Lieutenant Fola Oyewole, and Olamifion took part in the failed coup. Another officer of Igbo extraction, Major John Obieno, crushed the coup. Those who argued that the original intention of the coup plotters was anything but ethnic referred to the fact that the initial purpose of the plotters was to release Chief Obafemi Awolowo from prison immediately after the coup and make him the executive provisional president of Nigeria. The fact that these Igbo officers would do this to a man not known to be a great lover in quote of the Igbos may have given the coup a different ethnic coloration. But again, I may be wrong here. Since this view is speculative, I admit that my positions here, that means IBB, Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, admit, according to the book, that my position here may be the naive insight of an unsuspecting young officer who viewed events from a distance. My determination to make sense of the bizarre unfolding event was short-lived before I left for the United Kingdom barely days after the 1966 coup incident. Long before the coup attempt, I had been penciled down to attend a 4-month young officers course at Saladin Armoured Cars and Gunnery at the Royal Armoured Centre in Bovington, Dorset, United Kingdom. Saladins were 6-wheeled, 11-ton armored vehicles designed by the British Army in 1954 to replace the obsolete AEC armored car used during the World War II. Despite its age, the 3-crewed armored vehicle, armed with a 76mm low-pressure rifle, remained in service, albeit in secondary roles, until the early 1980s. They were used during the Nigerian Civil War. The course in Dorset was fine and was over by April 22, 1966. The actual course of study included details of the maintenance and driving and an extensive workshop on signals and radio communications. But in those 4 months, my mind was glued to events at home. When I returned to my reconnaissance unit in Kaduna, I saw and felt the tension in the air. The tension in the barracks was so palpable that you could touch it. It was clear that northern officers were spoiling for a fight. Don't miss this part. It was clear that northern officers were spoiling for a fight to retaliate against the killings of January 15. The tension was compounded by the fact that there was a well-organized campaign to brand us, the so-called northern officers, as cowards for failing to avenge the killings of the Prime Minister, the Southerner, and other northern officers who lost their life. This was where things got worse during the 1966 coup. Now, let us read the testimony of Ibrahim Babangida. Let's continue. As written in his new book, the controversial book that was launched during the week. I continue now. I recall a particular incident that I shall never forget. Some of us, young officers, had gone out one evening for drinks at a nightclub near the Ahmadu Bello Stadium. Had gone out one evening for drinks. Let me quickly point out something. Could it be that Babangida was taking alcohol at that time? Because if you say that you go to the nightclub for drinks, did Babangida get to the nightclub and was sipping Coke or Pepsi? Let us look at it. Babangida is a Muslim. The reason why I'm placing emphasis on this is it was Babangida that went to go and register Nigeria at OIC, Organization of Islamic Countries, despite knowing that Nigeria is not an Islamic country. Till today, Nigeria is still recognized by the Organization of Islamic Countries as a member. It was Babangida that went to put Nigeria's name there. So it is the same Babangida that when he became head of state, put Nigeria's name, register Nigeria with OIC. It's the same Babangida here that is confessing that he went to a nightclub one evening for drinks. You can see the hypocrisy in leadership. And that's why I usually tell people that always follow your mind and live according to your own values so that you don't get confused by some of these leaders. Now, let's continue the reading. I recall a particular incident that I shall never forget. Some of us young officers had gone out one evening for drinks at a nightclub near the Ahmadu Bello Stadium. As we settled down to our drinks, we were confronted by passers-by who recognized us. They rained abuses on us, calling us big fools and cowards for not doing what they thought we should do. Articles in newspaper pages were replete with scorn for us northern officers. Stories made the rounds that even the wives of married officers fought their husbands, calling them cowards and threatening to withhold conjugal benefits from them. That's in quotes, sex from them. It turned out that the wives of Igbo officers quite insensitively had been taunting the wives of northern officers about what had occurred to officers of northern extraction. I need to read that again for you. It turned out that the wives of Igbo officers quite insensitively had been taunting the wives of northern officers about what had occurred to officers of northern extraction. That was during the coup, according to Babangida. Let's continue. Meanwhile, the rumor mills went into overdrive with conspiracy theories. There were rumors that officers of Igbo extraction were planning a second coup to kill more northern officers. They hear, this is the genesis of the problem between the Igbo people and the Hausa Fulani, and that problem is still lingering till today. So if you are opportune to join me on this live session, definitely you are back to the 1966 coup just for absolutely free. So if you are yet to subscribe, do want to subscribe to this channel, and of course like this video and turn on your notification button, because we are going to continue the reading tomorrow, next tomorrow, till we finish the reading. It's a very interesting read. Now let's continue. There were rumors that officers of Igbo extraction were planning a second coup to kill more northern officers. Unfortunately, in the absence of an official federal government announcement about the fate of the soldiers killed during the January coup, rumors were rife as to whether they were dead or alive. For instance, there was the story of a riot that broke out at the 2nd Brigade headquarters in Lagos when an attempt was made to remove Brigadier Maimalari's nameplate, because many low-ranking officers believed that Maimalari was so invulnerable that he could not have died, and that since he was still alive, any attempt to remove his nameplate was a continuation of the plot against northern officers. There was also a rumored plan to swap the 1st and 4th battalions and rotate the military governors of the different regions. These rumors were amplified by stories of some Igbos gloating over the January killings. Contrary to a promise given after the coup was quashed that the coup plotters would be tried, none was ever brought to trial, although some were detained. On the contrary, a few of the coup plotters were promoted. This confirmed rumors that an Igbo domination. Again, I need to read this to you. On the contrary, a few of the coup plotters were promoted. This confirmed rumors that an Igbo domination of national affairs was in the works. Meanwhile, the role of disgruntled northern civilian propagandists and politicians picked up more steam. They deployed a combination of incitement and swirling rumors as psychological warfare to get northern soldiers to retaliate for the killings of January 15. The line just went off because I forgot to charge my phone. But thank God that YouTube didn't stop the live. It just kind of like, I think, paused it. So when I restart my phone, it just said, oh, that do I want to continue the live stream. Apologies for that. I forgot to plug my device for charging, so I didn't know that the battery was exhausted and it just went off like that. So if you're still with me, thanks, I really appreciate it. So we'll continue the reading. It's been an interesting read. I will just kind of like start from maybe like 2 early paragraphs, then we'll read the 4 pages more. I think there's about 4 pages more. Then when we read that, then we just end for the day. Then tomorrow we continue from another chapter. So without wasting time, let me just dive into it. It said there was a rumored plan to swap the 1st and 4th battalion. Let me refresh your mind. Babangida here was talking about the military coup. He was talking about the 1966 coup, and this was the genesis of what led to the alleged ethnic hatred between the Igbo people and the Hausa Fulani people till date. He said when the coup was carried out, that the Igbo officers then were glorifying themselves. The wife of the Igbo officers were abusing the wife of the Hausa Fulani officers at that point in time. The northern people were pressurizing the northern officers and calling them cowards, that, oh, they plan coup and kill your prominent people, you guys couldn't do anything. So that began to spur them to kind of like spur them to action as to how to retaliate for the coup. So Babangida in his book was telling us a first-hand story of what happened. So Babangida is taking us to as far back as 1966. Now let us continue the reading. If you are still with me, I really appreciate your presence. Now let's continue. It says there was a journey. I will reverse back by like 2 paragraphs so that you can flow along with the reading. It says there was also a rumored plan. I'm sorry, I'm trying to check my battery percentage. I hope it doesn't just die. So it said there was also a rumored plan to swap the 1st and 4th battalions and rotate the military governors of different regions. These rumors were amplified by stories of some Igbos gloating over the January killings. Contrary to a promise given after the coup was quashed that the coup plotters would be tried, none was ever brought to trial, although some were detained. On the contrary, a few of the coup plotters were promoted. This confirmed rumors that an Igbo domination of national affairs was in the works. Meanwhile, the role of disgruntled northern civilian propagandists and politicians picked up more steam. They deployed a combination of incitement and swelling rumors as psychological warfare to get northern soldiers to retaliate for the killings of January 15. Many civilian leaders kept hammering that we were cowards for not avenging the deaths of our leaders. This view is supported by General Yakubu Gowon's recollections of the army's official history of those years. General Gowon said the northern politicians infiltrated the northern soldiers and officers and trying to convince them that there was a need for them to retaliate. Unfortunately, some of the decisions of the Central Command in Lagos fed into the fears of those who suspected imminent sectional domination. For instance, in late May, convinced that the best way to unify the country was to issue the Unification Decree number 34 of 1966, abolishing and replacing the regions with a group of 35 provinces. That decree also unified the civil services. Decree 34 was a significant disadvantage to northern Nigeria, considering its inadequacy in human resources. This further fueled the fear of a southern domination of northern Nigeria and subsequently the entire country. Whether these fears of power domination were unfounded or not, it was clear that something was about to give from the sequence of cascading events. Unfortunately, the near collapse of the age-long tradition of military discipline during this period didn't help matters. Again, I read that. Unfortunately, the near collapse of the age-long tradition of military discipline during this period didn't help matters. Embittered by the events of January 15, many young officers, particularly non-commissioned NCOs of northern Nigerian extraction, became unmanageable. Many of them refused outright to take orders from their superiors, and in an army where most of the infantry were northerners, that constituted a real problem. I think I need to read that again. Many of them refused outright to take orders from their superiors, and in an army where most of the infantry were northerners, that constituted a real problem. Suddenly, there was a rush of mutinies in different army formations in the country. There was, for instance, the case of the 4th Battalion in Ibadan, where northern officers refused to take officers from Major M.O. Nzefili, who, as second in command at the battalion, replaced Lieutenant Colonel Abogo Lagema, who was murdered in Lagos during the January coup attempt. And even after another North TV officer, Major Joe Akan replaced Nzefili, that Joe Akan You know, is a familiar name if you're a student of history. You can read more about him. That Joe Akan. Now I continue. Major Joe Akan replaced Nzefili. The northern officers remained restive. Similar scenarios played out in other parts of the country, and by now, rumors of an imminent upheaval were so widespread, you know it was a question of time before we had a disastrous national crisis. On July 26, on July 28, 1966, things came to a head, and what has come to be known as the counter-coup of 1966 in Nigerian military history began. The commanding officer of the Abeokuta garrison, Lieutenant Colonel Gabriel Okonweze, called a meeting of the rank and file of the garrison to douse the rumors of another coup. Unfortunately, agitated and aggrieved junior northern officers who erroneously believed that the meeting was convened to complete the terrible killings begun during the January coup by Igbo officers burst into the forum, instantly killing Lieutenant Colonel Okonweze and the commander of the rest squadron, Major John Obienu. Lieutenant A.L. Orok, who drove in from town and stumbled on the situation, was also gunned down, obviously oblivious of the goings on. Orok, by the way, was Efik, not Igbo. Later that night, other officers of Igbo extraction in and around the garrison were identified and killed after a door-to-door search. Again, I need to read that. Later that night, other officers of Igbo extraction. This is according to Babangida himself, telling the story of the 1966 counter-coup, how we started. He said, later that night, other officers of Igbo extraction in and around the garrison were identified and killed after a door-to-door search. That means they were going from door to door. If you be Igbo, you collect. If you be, that was what they did that time. Let's continue. The killings quickly spread to Ibadan and Lagos. Captain Okoye, who was in transit at the Ikeja airport in Lagos, was arrested and killed. In Ibadan, hostile troops surrounded the state house at Agodi, where General Ironsi, the state's military governor, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Adekunle Fajuyi, and the 2nd Brigade Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hilary Njoku, were located. The hostile troops abducted Ironsi, Fajuyi, and Ironsi's Air Force ADC, Captain Andrew Nwakwo. Ironsi and Fajuyi were later killed. However, Nwakwo managed to escape. The killings continued in Kaduna. The first victim was the commander of the Kaduna-based 3rd Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Israel Okoro. His death in Kaduna was followed by that of the commander of the 2nd Risk Squadron, Major Isong. In Kano, where the 5th Battalion was under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Mohammed Shua, the situation seemed initially under control until the troops mutinied, leading to the death of many Igbo civilians in Kano. Apparently, what started as an attack on Igbo officers became an attack on Igbo civilians and officers alike. You dey hear so? Later, what began as an attack on Igbo officers became an attack on Igbo civilians and officers alike. So that means that when they were killing the Igbo officers at that time, then they decided to spread it to the Igbo civilian. That means that even if you are not part of the Nigerian military, you are not a military man, if they identify that you are an Igbo person, you collect. That's what IBB is telling us here. And Margaret's result says, what time tomorrow? I will tell you the time. Let me be true with this reading. Please bear with me. So, and where did I start? Igbo officers were under mutiny, and the Igbo officer came under attack on Igbo civilians and officers alike. Okay, let's continue. Unfortunately, the violence got out of control and spread to parts of Bauchi, Sokoto, Katsina, and Zaria. According to Babangida, here this, hundreds of Igbos died between Sunday, May 29 and Sunday, June 5, 1966. I think Babangida was trying to be careful here. Is it hundreds or should we call it thousands of Igbos? So that means that Igbos have been, You know, Igbos have been suffering from different killings in Nigeria since as far back as 1966. That's according to Babangida himself. Now, let's continue the reading. The collapse of discipline within the military was so devastating that even northern officers had to be protected from rampaging northern and from rampaging northern NCOs. For instance, Lieutenant Joe Akahan's unruly junior officers shot him out of his barracks. There was the story, for example, of the Army's Provost Marshal, Major Ekanem, who was shot dead for no reason by Sergeant Labdam on Kata Bridge in Lagos while on an errand for Lieutenant Colonel Gowon. In August 1966, a detachment of the 4th Battalion in Ibadan, consisting of NCOs and junior officers, raided the old Benin prison to release northern soldiers who had been held there since the January coup attempt. While inside the prison premises, they murdered 5 Igbo officers who were also detained in the same prison for their role in the January coup. Imagine, they went to a coup to rescue northern officers. The Igbo officers that were detained along with them for participating in the first coup. You release those northern officers. Those Igbo officers, you decide to murder them too, despite the fact that they were not part of the coup. So it became an ethnic something that, you know, and if you are Igbo, straight. That's what Ibrahim Babangida is revealing to us here. Now, let's continue the read. You see why? This thing, just that I'm not in the mood for analysis. And that's why if you are yet to subscribe to this channel. That's why it is somehow difficult for somebody like Peter Obi to be president, because that distrust is there. They don't have that trust, and this is the background. So if you're opportune to join this live, well, you are really great indeed, sincerely. Now let's continue. While inside the prison premises, they murdered 5 Igbo officers who were also detained in the same prison for their role in the January coup, including Major, including Majors Chris Anuforo and Donatus Okafor. The chaotic period of indiscipline was widespread enough for unruly and devious officers to attempt to use the occasion to settle old scores with their superiors. This situation almost cost the life of a fine officer like Samuel Ogbemudia. Before the counter-coup, Major Ogbemudia had detained Lieutenant Buka Suwa Dimka, yes, my same old friend, Buka Dimka, for violating an order forbidding unauthorized troop movement. But after Dimka protested that he was the unfair victim of ethnic profiling, Ogbemudia released him from detention. Angered by this provocation, Dimka hatched a plot to kill Brigade Major Ogbemudia. Fortunately, Ogbemudia was tipped off by Colonel Hassan Kastina and Major Abba Kazil, who then provided Ogbemudia with an escaped Land Rover complete with a submachine gun. Meanwhile, Dimka, who got wind of this, marshaled a group of northern soldiers who then pursued Ogbemudia from Kaduna to Owo in Ondo. Kilode? Wait, according to IBB here, that's why you must not miss the rest of this reading. He said they pursued Ogbemudia from Kaduna to Owo in Ondo State. You know what it means to pursue somebody from Kaduna all the way to Owo in Ondo State? Sometimes shooting at him. At Owo, Ogbemudia abandoned his Land Rover when he ran out of fuel and was said to have scaled a 6-foot fence into a thick forest to escape Dimka's soldiers. Man, a lot of blood had been shed in Nigeria. Maybe that's why everywhere just the scatter. May God help us. Let's continue the reading. It must have been an awful experience for a man like Ogbemudia, who would, after that scary experience, have an exemplary career in the Nigerian army. In Enugu, as was the case during the January coup attempt, the situation was calmer, thanks to the prompt intervention of the commander of the 1st Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel David Ogunewe. Once he got knowledge of the killings in other parts of the country, he quickly locked up the battalion's armory and placed it under the joint guard of northern and southern officers. Those were truly terrible times. The killings, which started on May 29, peaked on September 26, 1966. According to official army records, no less than 213 predominantly Igbo officers and other ranks were killed during that period. I need to take that again. The killings, which started on May 29, peaked at September 29, 1966. According to official army records, no less than 213 predominantly Igbo officers and other ranks were killed during that period. And many civilians in different parts of the country also lost their lives. This period was undoubtedly a dark phase in our history as a nation. The first coup attempt, which led to the counter-coup, should never have occurred. The young idealistic officers bite off more than they could chew. Without question, both events, the first coup and the counter-coup, deepened the distrust. Hear this. I said it, that this was what led to the distrust between Igbo and the Hausa Fulani that is happening today. Now, Babangida is telling us, Ibrahim Badamos Babangida is telling us that without question, both events, the first coup and the counter-coup, deepened the distrust among ethnic groups in the country. Distrust that continues to plague us to this day. You can see, Babangida is even telling us, see, I just talk and I say I be prophet, right? He said distrust that continue to plague us to this day. And that distrust, if you link it to the Peter Obi presidential, ambition, that's why the North, till today, they've passed it from generation to generation. That's why it's very difficult for a Northerner to trust an Igbo man. And the problem is that you cannot become Nigeria's president without the Igbo vote. Remember that when Abiola won the election, he had, majority vote in the North. He even defeated Tofa in Kano State. So you can see that it's now let us continue. Even more fundamentally, those coups led to one of the bloodiest fratricidal conflicts in modern Africa, the 30-month Nigerian civil war, with devastating consequences that we have never fully recovered from as a country. My participation in the Nigerian civil war as a combatant left. My participation in the Nigerian civil war as a combatant left deep scars on me, both literally and metaphorically. It redefined for me the very essence of human existence. But even more fundamentally, it drove home the simple fact of the futility of war, whether on a national scale or a continental scale, and that the consequences of war, including the physical and psychological effect, takes time to heal if they ever do. Now, if you have stayed with me, this is the end of chapter 3. You would agree with me that it's been an interesting read, and sincerely, kudos to Ibrahim Babangida for this book, because he really spoke the truth. He didn't say, oh, during the counter-coup, Igbo officers were not killed. He didn't try to polish it. He states it as it is, that Igbo officers and Igbo civilians were massively killed in the counter-coup of 1966. And he even stated that it was that spirit, even after the coup, that when the civil war occurred in 1967, the northern soldiers, fired the Igbo people, fired them pieces based on that, that hostility that had existed between them during the counter coup. So kudos to Ibrahim Babangida, sincerely. I never thought that his book would be very real like this. I never thought that his book would be so very detailed. I thought he would mince words, that he would want to polish things and kind of like, say the favorable side. But I think IBB wrote the book like a man that, he has seen that maybe he will soon die. And he wants to be in good terms with his creator. That's why he wrote this kind of book, because he has been saying the truth so far. From what I've read, some of the things that I'm reading here for you collaborate with some of the things that I was taught in history as a secondary school student. Even the history that I was taught as a secondary school student was not even as deep as this. And that's why it's always good for you to read. So if you have participated in this reading, if you have been listening to me, definitely one important thing is that you've done something good with your life today. I usually tell people around me, in this modern age and time of technology, of development, whereby human beings and the world we live in is growing complex, you cannot afford to live a day as a human being without learning anything that is of intelligence or knowledgeable, without asking yourself, what have I listened to today that is knowledgeable? What have I read today that has impacted my life? It's not just about watching movies, watching comedy. Have you listened to anything? It doesn't have to be politics. Have you listened to anything that impacts your life positively? Have you read anything that impacts your life? Because the way the world is going, knowledge cannot be substituted for ignorance. So if you have been with me on this read, definitely I appreciate all of you. So what we will do is that tomorrow we will continue from chapter 4. And I can tell you by the special grace of God that we will read this book to the end, because it's been very interesting. I must tell you, it's been more interesting than I ever imagined. So chapter 4, he spoke about the Nigerian Civil War and the NDA teaching year. So if chapter 3 can be very interesting like this, imagine what will be in chapter 4. That's where he wants to talk about the Civil War. So what I can tell you is, tomorrow by the grace of God, or before tomorrow, recommend my page to people that you know. Tell them to subscribe and turn on their notification button. Tell who needs to know, or who knows somebody that needs to know what needs to be known, that Politing with Dr. Omosholadeji is the place to be. I will call it a wrap now, but after a while, and that's why I said you should subscribe to my channel, I have one video for you today about El-Rufai and Atiku, the way El-Rufai have been crusading all across the country for Atiku Abubakar. I have a 10-minute video, just a 10-minute analysis on that, and in that 10-minute analysis, there's 2 videos attached. Don't miss it for any reason. It's been an interesting time with you on this episode of Politing with Dr. Omosholadeji. Till I see you tomorrow, in all you do. But before I go, let me read this comment. I think I have 2 comments. It's a bit of, I think people are sharing their opinion about the reading. And Mangrace Result Center says the problem in our society has been lack of cognitive development and adequate information people assessing the truth without bias. And Tone O says the killing of Igbos as far back as 1948. The killing of Igbos goes as far back as 1948, but escalated in the build-up to the Civil War. Aside from the Igbos doing well wherever they find themselves, let to jealousy and eventual hatred. Okay, apart from the Igbos doing well anywhere they find themselves, led to jealousy and eventual hatred. That is according to Tone O. I'm sorry I can't read all the comments. If I've missed any part of this video, do well to reverse back, and if you need to share it with anybody, do well to share it with them. See you tomorrow. In all you do, always remember that I love you all sincerely.